All good. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Frontline Club. We're looking forward to an interesting discussion and debate this evening. I'm going to introduce myself and the panel to you very shortly. But the subject of this debate is a really critical one. We are dealing with one of the wettest countries on Earth, which has 12% of the world's fresh water, and yet it's suffering a staggering water crisis of the kind that it's never experienced before. We are seeing in one side of the country massive floods. We'll hear about directly from people who have been afflicted by those floods going on just in the. And then on the other side of Brazil, in Sao Paulo, you have a city of 22 million people facing chronic drought. This extraordinary bipolar situation is unique in the history of Brazil. There have been floods before, there have been droughts before. What is scary is that the frequency of these events is increasing. And we don't know why. And part of our discussion tonight is to get to the bottom of the why. Why could this be happening? Who's responsible? Who should we blame? Is there anyone to blame? Or is it just something natural that we have no power at all? These are some of the weighty questions we'll be thinking about. And who are the people who are being affected? It's not a small. Sao Paulo is one of the biggest cities in the world. We've got a situation where three of the biggest, most populous states in Brazil are fighting each other in court over water. It's an extraordinary situation. We've got reservoirs that are down to just 5% of their normal capacity. And yet, this is the giant nation, the size of and more, which holds the Amazon in its borders. The Amazon that discharges the largest amount of water of any river on Earth, that recycles 8 trillion tons of water vapor every year. And yet we're seeing this crisis of flooding and drought. Something is going dramatically wrong. And the impact is often on the poor, on business, and what are politicians doing about it? What is the world saying about it? Well, these are some of the issues that I want to explore tonight, and we've got a fantastic panel here of experts who have had real experience of this, either through exploration, through science, or through their own communities that have been affected, or through journalism in Brazil. So this is the second in the series of what we call exploration at the Frontline. It's something new. The Frontline Club, I've been a member for quite a number of years. I'm not a journalist, I'm an explorer and a scientist. I spent most of my life exploring and studying tropical rainforests. But I love this club because we're all people who work at the front line of these issues. And this is a great way to bring science and exploration and journalism together. So one of the really important things about this is you in the audience. You're part of this, and I want to hear what you think. Somebody might be an expert. Somebody might have no knowledge of it. But let's have an opinion. So you're going to hear from the panelists first. We're going to go through what they've got to say. And I'll try and ask them a few challenging questions. And then we want you to put all of us on the spot. Ask your challenging questions as we try to get to the bottom of a very, very interesting subject. So my name is Andrew Mitchell. I'm the chairman of the Scientific Exploration Society, which has formed this partnership with the Frontline Club. SES has been, for the last 60 years, 40 or 60, Sally? Sally at the back there is the organizer, well, done all the hard work. But for many decades, the Scientific Exploration Society has been organizing expeditions all over the world, many of them led by Colonel John Basford Snell is one of the most famous British explorers. But now the baton is being passed to many others. And exploration still has a huge role to play here in getting into the heart of these issues in very remote areas and working with scientists and so on. So that's what I do. But in my day job, I also run something called the Global Canopy Programme, which is a think tank in Oxford that studies tropical rainforests and the causes of their deforestation. So I'm going to run you through...
in the trees above rather than canopies to eat.
Yes, not canopies to eat, the canopy above. So, okay, now with that brief introduction, I'm going to run through the panel. Next door to me is Sue Cunningham, who is a photographer, author, and trustee of Tribes Alive, an Indigenous Peoples Cultural Support Trust. She and her husband, Patrick, where are you? There's Patrick in the front row there, were awarded the Neville Shulman Prize by the Royal Geographical Society for their Heart of Brazil expedition, traveling on the Xingu, which is a huge river right through the center of Brazil, visiting 48 tribal villages and documenting the effects of climate change and man's dramatic impact on the rainforest. Next to her is Nishiwaka Yawanawa. He represents a 900-strong Yawanawa community in Acre, which is the westernmost state of the Brazil, and very much just right on the edge of the western side of the Amazon. The people of the wild boar of Acre, within the western Amazon rainforest of Brazil, an area recently decimated by terrible flooding. Nishiwaka is currently working for Survival International here in London, a global movement for tribal people's rights. Then we have Peter Bunyard, who's an author, journalist, and founder of The Ecologist magazine. Some of you may have heard of The Ecologist, now combining with Resurgence magazine. He has spent many years exploring and lecturing on the subject of indigenous responsibilities in the Colombian Amazon. More recently, having been alerted to the biotic pump theory, studies in Costa Rica and back home in Cornwall to test the physics of this theory, which he'll tell you more about. And basically what he's going to show is that the Amazon rainforest is much, much more powerful and important than we thought of, and it challenges the current climate modeling on the impact of deforestation in the Amazon basin. Next to him is Freddie Otto, who is a senior researcher at the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford, leading the Distributed Volunteer Computing Project. Her main research interest is the attribution of weather events to external climate drivers. A major focus of this work is to explore the propagation of uncertainty from external drivers of actual impacts on climate change and to assess the associated risks. So there's some tensions here between the story that Peter is going to tell and the story that Freddie is going to tell. We want to explore that. And finally, we have Rogério Simões, who's a Brazilian journalist based in London. He's the former head of BBC Brazilian service and has written about Brazil for the CNN website. He's also an executive editor of the Brazilian weekly news magazine Epoca and London correspondent of Folha de São Paulo newspaper. So please welcome our panel. Okay, without more ado, I'm going to ask Sue Cunningham to tell us a little bit about her journey and her thoughts.
Well, I think we're starting off with an animation that explains the water cycle, which was a project from Margie and Gerard Moss called Flying Rivers. So just to set the scene.
Flying Rivers was a project by Margie and Gerard Moss, explaining exactly how the rains fall onto the forest. Not all of the water that falls as rain on the forest actually reaches the ground. A lot of it stays in the canopy, and in the morning it evaporates again, the winds carry it along, and it falls again further along. As soon as it gets into the weather system coming off the Andes, it turns towards the south. It needs a corridor of trees in order to fall as rain, evaporate, move forward, fall as rain, evaporate, move forward. And it's always moving south. It actually gives rain to the south of Brazil, which is the productive area of sugar, of coffee, of soya, all sorts of things. Even into Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, they'd all be affected. That is terrible. If that corridor, like the corridor of the Xingu, where the Indians are the guardians of the forest, they're holding the forest up for the rain to continue to the south of Brazil. If they go, the forest will suffer because the chainsaws will come, the bulldozers will come, the soya, the cattle will come, the waters will dry up. You know, it's a very short-term gain for a few people against a devastating result. You look, and that whole latitude, there are deserts all the way around, except in South Brazil because of the rains in the north, because of the forest, because of the Amazon, because the Indians are holding those corridors up.
So that kind of sets the scene, I think. Andrew introduced me. Patrick and I did an expedition in 2007 following the Xingu River, which is one of the main tributaries of the Amazon. It took us 6 months in a very small boat, and we had to take our fuel with because there's nothing else along there except communities and peoples. So it was the perfect place to see exactly what was happening and how climate change was affecting people. So the area we're talking about is this section here. And you can see how nice and green it is and how not so green everything else is, because that's all deforested. This area, you can see all the different indigenous reserves along the route of the river. So the forests of the Xingu start off quite what we call dry forest, which isn't very thick and heavy, and then you finally get to the mysterious Amazon forest, which is fantastic. So the full length of the Xingu, you've got various types of different forests, but they all play a vital part. And if it weren't for the Indians that are there, that forest would go. As I said before, the chainsaws would come. So most indigenous communities live in a circle, and in the center is a men's hut where all decisions are made. That was our boat. That was home for 6 months. Most of the time we slept in the center of the village, but that's another story. Can't tell you all that now. We had solar panels for our equipment. Anyway, moving on. So I've only got 7 minutes on that. Right. So the river is very important, not just for fishing and bathing and drinking, but also communication, because that is their road. They don't have roads in that part of the Amazon. They have the river, and that is their via. So in many parts we saw incredible flooding going on, flash flooding all over the place, and yet we started the expedition in April, just after the rainy season, and the river was much drier than ever before, and the Indians were complaining about this. They were talking about their manioc and about their crops. It's their stable crop is manioc. They have small plantations, and as you can see, they're very sort of skinny because they weren't swelling up with the rainwater, because it wasn't the right kind of rain. Handed to me. So the Amazon forest, which well, Peter will talk about I won't go into that. But anyway, 300 litres of humidity can come off every single one of those trees. But he'll explain that. And the trees are falling, unfortunately. There are a lot of people that go in illegally into indigenous areas. They cut down all the noble trees. Then they put roads in. They burn the rest of the forest because it's not important to them. And then suddenly you start seeing that the water level of lakes and ponds and things is going down. And what's going on? When you look at some of the areas where the cattle are put onto land that's been deforested, you can see how dry it is. The other problem of cattle, of course, is they go near to the edge of the water and they poo all over the place, so all that goes into the water system. 2 Indians from the Kayapot tribe from that region came with us in a plane. They wanted to see from above what was going on. So they saw a new road being built into their reserve, and deforestation was already beginning to happen. This is all illegal. There are, on the other hand, just outside the reserve, incredibly large monocultures of they go on for 48 kilometers, just one side of one farm. I mean, we're talking very large pieces of land. And it's so dry. And that really causes erosion and silting up of the rivers and, pardon? Agrotoxins. Sorry, my husband always has to prompt me. So, agrotoxins from the plantations. They use herbicides and all sorts of nasty things. That all goes into the water. Then the fish are contaminated also by mercury from illegal gold mining. But it's not just the illegal gold mines, it's also mega mining corporations that are all multinationals. A lot of them have English investors. And you can see, when you're flying over, you can see where the silting happens along from a small river into a pristine river. It's very obvious. So water, we can't live without it. It's beautiful. And I used to drink the water of the Xingu River, 10 years ago, but I wouldn't do it now because the Indians, not only can they not even see the fish because of the silting, but the pollution that's in the water that you can't see is really bad. But of course it is a rainforest and there's a lot of rain still in the rainforest. But a lot of the water, as I said, is polluted. These are 3 generations of women, grandmother, mother and daughter, and they're taking water for the last time from a very small brook, and they had to walk miles to get it back to their village, because that was the morning that the last pump along the Xingu, Alto Xingu, which is a whole section of 14 different tribal communities. They all have wells now because they need to take water from groundwater. They can't drink river water anymore. That is incredibly sad. That's, just unbelievable to me, who's, after 30 years of traveling there and drinking water all over the place and never, touch wood, being ill. I just can't believe it, but there you are. So the river can look like that at times. So when you've got hydroelectric dams coming in, it'll spoil that freedom, all that culture, all that love for the forest. The river is still beautiful, but there's a huge cloud hanging over it, and that is the Belo Monte Dam. On this exact place, it's going to look like that. And the building is going on now. So the indigenous peoples, and we met over 10,000 people on our trip, were really angry. And they always said, please take the message. Because I said, well, I can't, I'm only one person. What do you want me to do? And they said, just tell everybody you meet what's really going on. Hauni, with his wonderful lip plate, has a thing or two to say, and which I'll. He's the chief of the Kayapon Nation. That's alone over 8,000 people, and I'm going to talk about him in a minute. So there were women from the Kayabi Nation, from all sorts. There were non-indigenous peoples too, all complaining and saying, where are we going to plant? What are we going to do? How are we going to feed our grandchildren if these dams go ahead? 60 dams are planned across the Amazon. That would be a devastating result. Indians
Planned by when?
Oh, no.
Mañana.
Yes, but some are already under construction. No, some are already under construction. 20 are already under construction? Thank you. There you are, 20 are already under construction. So indigenous peoples from the full length of the Xingu River got together in Altamira, which is a town near the end of the river, near Altamira, near the Amazon, which the Xingu flows into. And even after all the arguing and trying to get some results from people from the government, were invited and were blinding them with scientific graphs and things, and they knew that these guys were lying to them. They went down to the river to bless the waters, because that is the most important thing to them. There were demonstrations all over Brazil against Belo Monte, and are still going on against the other dams in the Tapajós mainly, which is the next river along. In 2012, the United Nations Conference for Sustainable Development in Rio was happening, and the Indians were there again. And they came in peace because all they wanted to do was to hand in a document to the heads of state that were there for the Earth Summit to say, look, please, you've got to stop investing in infrastructure in Brazil because it's going to the wrong places. And they were met with military police, with riot gear, dogs, water cannons. It was disgraceful. And, well, anyway. So some of them came to London and demonstrated outside banks in the city of London to say, hey, someone has to listen. And Haoni, the big chief with the lip plate, he came in the summer last year with Megaron, his nephew, to pass on this message. They were on Channel 4. They had a fantastic interview. They went on to Parliament. Andrew was with us, which was fantastic. We also met Prince Charles, who was incredibly enthusiastic as well, enthusiastic to their plight. What else can I say? And then in Rio, I was there a month ago. We were there a month ago, and the demonstrations on the street, eruption of Petrobras, and that goes deeper and deeper. They want the president out. I don't know if that's going to actually solve the problem. But there were women with pots and pans banging at 7 o'clock at night, which was amazing. So, you know, we don't want to drown indigenous communities in this big word, progress. And I'll just leave one little thought, which is hope is alive on the raging rapids of the Xingu, and the spirit of the rainforest is reflected in the eyes of the who draw their lives from its bountiful waters. Glenn, thank you.
Thank you, Sue, very much. And I should say, well done. Let's give her a bit of hand. It's so hard. When you see this much pain up front, it's very hard to get it out in 7 minutes, I can tell you. Feel free, if you're in the audience, interject. If you want to ask a quick question, we can't open all that, but if you've got something that's a burning issue, let it out. Don't forget it later. So bring it out. If you want a quick question, we can have one. Yeah, okay, go.
What's the difference then between your approach to stopping things that are illegal and things that are legal? Do you need two different approaches? Some of these things are illegal, some deforestation is completely illegal. How do you approach the sort of different?
Well, I don't approach it at all. I just observe. But my husband has a word or two to say. Patrick will answer, I think. Let him answer.
The big problem with Brazil is that the big problem with Brazil is that the government is quite happy to sit on the side of the illegal. There have been numerous legal challenges to Belo Monte. They've been swept aside using a very dodgy law from the times of the military dictatorship. Basically, what they've done is delayed any judgment, final judgment on these cases, until after the dam has been completed. Judged by right up to an appeal court as being a breach of the Brazilian constitution, yet it's still under construction. So under those circumstances, illegal, legal.
Here's my words.
I should point out, just so everybody's clear, that this event is being filmed and is being streamed live as well. So if there's anything that you might regret saying later,
now you
then,
tell me.
Be careful. So no good. No, so I should have told you that, Patrick, at the beginning. But this is all public anyway, in a sense, because this is a public meeting. So that's fine, and that's what we want. Yes, a question here.
They also passed a constitutional law about 18 years ago guaranteeing Indian land rights in perpetuum. And 2 years later, there was a change of government. They rescinded it, and 170 companies applied to invade the preserves. Yeah. So, I mean, you're dealing with a government that can't even keep its act straight.
Okay, well, look, there's lots of interesting questions that will come out here. Let's hear from Nishiwaka as well, from his perspective of a community that is directly affected by the floods and this crisis. Nishiwaka, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. I feel very happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity given to me, and it means for tribal people. We need this space to send our message. I would like to on our tribe that is in the west of the Amazon in Brazil. My people, we are just over 900, and as you may know, Brazil, we have more than 300 tribes, and they speak more than 270 languages. But because now the use of Portuguese, we all can communicate, and nowadays what we are doing is getting together and we do protest. That is our last option. When we see our land being destroyed, we need to shout loud. But it's not just, our land is not just being destroyed by the activity of a human, but also for natural disaster, and that's the question. And the end of there was a big flood, a terrible flood in my tribe, and many villages. We have around 8 villages, 9 villages. They were all affected. We lost everything, creation of animals, work material, houses, and almost our lives. But before that, I would like to show a short video of the flood, the actual flood happening. It starts in the middle of the night. Everyone was sleeping, and the river the water just raised by sudden. That's our river. It was all completed underwater. We never thought that this would happen one day. We have our shamans. Our shamans usually they are the oldest person in a tribe. They are both of them over 100 years old. And one of them said, in 100 years, we never saw this kind of floods in our land. And everyone got very surprised, shocked. But we have to carry on. And that video who made was my uncle. He's one of the Yawanawat people. So the first time I came to London, it was 2010. It's been now over 4 years that I'm living in London. It was very difficult because it's a completely different way of life. We live in nature, we hunt, we fish, we have our rivers, our animals, and for someone to leave the tribe and start living in a big city like London, it's a big change. So it was very difficult for me to also adapt. I was shocked by the weather, of course. It's too cold. But I did it, and I still do. Right today, I work for the charity Survive International, the global movement for tribal people rights around the world. And I feel very privileged to have this chance to tell to the public what we feel and what we have been what we are facing today in Brazil. That's just some picture of some of my people and other tribes in Brazil. It will also show some picture about the deforestation. We have a big problem in Brazil with the deforestation. The illegal logging, it's very strong and it's happening very fast in the Amazon. If you see the map of Brazil, you will see that the last piece of land, green color, is indigenous land. And that proves that we know how to look after our land. And we have been doing this for immemorial times. But now we see all this development, progress in our life, and this is changing. Lots of people now talking about the climate change, and for us indigenous people, we don't need, well, the scientific proof is just to give that push to show that it's really true what's going on today. But from our perspective, the deforestation has to do a lot with the climate change. And we know that if we keep preserving our land, and it will keep the balance of the environment. Some people, I've been visiting school in the UK, and it is very interesting how the students, they get surprised when I tell them where I come from and what's going on. Sometimes people, they think because it's very far from Brazil, South America, it has nothing to do, but it does. Imagine our planet without nature. It's just part of our lives. It's part of our body. And this is our struggle. We want to protect, we want to secure our forests for the next generation. We are sure that it will contribute also for yours, and we need your support. This is what I'm doing here in London. I'm here in a mission. It's to spread the word. Today, indigenous people, what we need is a voice. We need a space. And I'm very happy to know that the international public, they are very concerned, and there are many people willing to help. International, I see how the public, they get involved, and they really help us to preserve our land. And Survive International, they give to indigenous people a voice. It is a platform, and it really works. But we also we have a big problem as well about the legislation. My English sometimes just going back. Since 1988, we indigenous people finally, after years struggle, we got our rights on our land, and it's in there on Brazil Constitution. But we have also powerful politicians, agro-business politicians against indigenous people. Movement, and it's going on now in Brazil, a draft law called PEC 215. It's a law that if it's passed by the Congress, it will give power to the politician to give the final word if indigenous land can be recognized by the government or not. So it means that our land, if this draft law passed, our land will be opened for mining, more illegal loggings, and it will mean the destruction of everything. And we don't want this to happen. We want everyone understanding. First of all, you understand, and then you might do something to help, to support our struggle, our movement. So I think this is for now, and we'll keep on. And thank you for the opportunity. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Is there a quick burning question from someone here? You've already had one. Let's have another person. Anyone? No one? Come back. Okay, you.
Is there a petition that we should be signing or something we should be doing to
Oh, yeah.
this law being passed that you want to send us all by email after this?
Yeah, if you go to Survive International website, there you will find the petition and also for other cases. And then you can sign a petition from the website. Yeah.
So you've heard how, in a sense, the indigenous communities are victims of this change, which is driven by huge forces that lie way outside the Amazon. It's something we may come back to. And it's how you are connected in this room without realizing it. Do you know what your pension funds are investing in? Where does some of the biggest investment in rainforest destruction come from?
Palm oil. Palm oil?
Who's paying for that? British banks. You are, in your pension funds. Who had chicken last week? This week? Hands up. Who had chicken this week? Come on, it's not a vegetarian question. Put your hands up. Who had chicken? Few people. Who had, okay, well, let's stick with chicken. Where did the chicken come from? Britain or Thailand? Cheap chicken from Thailand. Cheap chicken from the Netherlands. Who had bacon? Yeah, a few of you. Okay, and who had a boiled egg? Yeah, so we're probably talking about a lot of people in this room been eating those three things. Chickens in Europe are fed on soy from the Amazon. Beef cattle is raised on cattle cake, which includes soy from the Amazon. The boiled egg, British breakfast, you're eating the Amazon, and you don't know it.
Even if we're eating Prince Charles's eggs.
I don't know about Prince Charles's eggs. But this is not about, I'm not to blame anyone. This is just the way the global business is working. The investment is coming from our pension funds. It's coming from our choices on the products we buy. Whoever looked at the packet of chicken and said, is that fed on soy from the Amazon? You wouldn't know. You might know if it had palm oil in it, if it came from Asia, but that's a different story. China is one of the biggest importers of soy in the world. Why? Because they want to feed their chickens and pigs on it. Where's the soy coming from?
Beef.
Why do they want to feed their chickens and pigs on it? Because it's much better to grow chickens and pigs than cows. It's a much better conversion rate on protein. And they've got 1 billion people to feed. Oil. Palm oil. Yeah, well, then there's other, we're talking about Brazil, but yes, oil industry, massive destroyer of rainforests through roads and everything else that goes in. So these are all commodities that are traded worldwide that cause rainforest. And you've heard now about some of the victims of this. How do we unpick that? So now I want to ask Peter to tell us a bit, because the net effect of all this, and we're focused on Brazil here, is the destruction of the Amazon. The biggest cause of the destruction of the Amazon is the cattle industry, producing beef and leather. You buy a handbag in Italy, it might have come from the Amazon, the leather. You drive a big, nice BMW sitting on that big, shiny seat. Where did the leather come from? The Amazon. So these are big issues. So the net result is the destruction of the rainforest. But to what extent is the destruction of the rainforest a cause of this water crisis? Or is it something else? Let's hear from Peter, and he'll tell us about some new theories about why the destruction is so important in this water crisis. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Yes.
But you only got about 5 to 7 minutes.
Okay. Yes, well, I won't go into it too long. But anyhow, I mean, I'll just start off by saying that I got into my interest in the Amazon in 1969 following an article by in the Sunday Times which talked about ethnocide on a massive scale in the Brazilian Amazon. And that was the beginning of Survival International. And that is one of the reasons why I live in Cornwall, because Robin Hambridge-Jennison, who started Survival International, lives in Cornwall and invited us who were involved with setting up the ecologists to go there. But having read that article, I had this ghastly apocalyptic vision that when we had destroyed the cultures of the last indigenous people in the Amazon, then that would be our own demise. And I must admit, I still feel that very strongly. Okay, so the biotic pump, I mean, it's somewhat scientific. Why is it important? Why have I been working on that for the last few years? Well, it was a theory thought up some 7 years ago, a physical theory, theoretical, obviously, well, based on by two Russians at the Institute of Nuclear Physics in St. Petersburg, Anastasia Makarieva and Viktor Gorshkov. And the theory basically said that if we're talking about the Amazon, that the trade winds which come from Africa, north and south, and meet over the Amazon basin in what's called the intertropical convergence zone, and bringing in masses of water vapor, some 12 million tons per year of water vapor, that those trade winds are sucked in as a result of the high rate of evaporation from the Amazon rainforest, which feeds cloud formation. And when clouds form, vapor vanishes and goes into droplets or ice or whatever, and there is a pressure change, an implosion. And so the Russian theory very simply said that this implosion, when clouds formed, fed on a massive scale by the rainforest, actually sucks the air upwards, and then that air which is sucked upwards has to be replaced by air flowing over the surface, and therefore the trade winds. Now, this theory was immediately damned by practically every meteorologist and climatologist, and they said, that's not the way the atmosphere works. But I read some of those papers by the Russians very intently, and I found the physics was there, but I found that the ideas very inspiring. And so I, who had not done research for 50 years, I last was an insect physiologist doing research at Harvard, I decided to think about the biotic pump theory, as it was, and to see how one could possibly find evidence for or against the theory. And this just shows you, I'm sorry it's in Spanish, but it just shows you more or less that the trade winds come in, the vientos alisios, the trade winds, you have evaporation from the ocean, and then the rainfall, and so on. And then when the air hits the Andes, as you saw beautifully in what Sue was showing, the air mass is deflected going southwards and feeds Argentina and the south of Brazil with water. And in fact, the passage goes right the way across to South Africa. And anyhow, we won't worry about that. That, in a nutshell, is the biotic pump theory. I'm just, that it is physics.
Could you go through that in great detail, Peter? we might need to be here till 1 minute.
It's just to show you that this is classical 19th century physics, and which climatologists, meteorologists use. There's nothing mysterious about the physics at all. I just say that. I'm going to move on for those of you who are physicists. And anyhow, so I did various things. I looked at radio sounding data going from Africa all the way across to Bogota, which is at 4 degrees north, is the latitude of the Amazon. And as I point out to people in Colombia, they don't know it, but Bogota gets an Amazonian climate, but at 9,000 feet. And so the radio sounding data gave me amazing insights, and using the physics of the two Russians, I was able to show that a gradient of upward movement of the air exists, as you might expect, going from the Sahara all the way across via the Canaries to the mouth of the Amazon and across to the various stations which give you that data, which you can pick off the web on a daily basis. And I also went to Costa Rica, to a forest called La Selva, which means forest, and it's on the east side of Costa Rica, lowland forest, very much like the Amazon. And I looked at meteorological data there, which was made freely available, and I found something quite extraordinary, that when you looked at the way that the airflow coming from the trade winds moved over the forest, it fluctuated during the daytime. Of air, a change maybe of 1 meter per second or whatever. Nothing very elaborate, nothing that you could truly feel as a gust, but just something. And when I looked at surface humidity coming off the forest, it showed exactly the same pulsing. And I've done that for years, several years. There are about 10 pulses during daylight hours, and they correspond. I was going to show them, but because I was told there was very little time, I'm afraid I deleted them. But anyway, so the finale of what I want to say is that I thought up the way to try and do an experiment, which sort of, in my mind, vaguely reflected the sort of circulation that you might expect going from Africa via the trade winds over the rainforest, then the air ascending and getting left behind essentially because of the spin of the earth, and then falling as dry, cold, dense air over Africa and forming the Sahara, and in the south the Kalahari. They're related absolutely directly to the Amazon. And so I devised this at my home in Cornwall. I devised a structure which is 5 meters high, and it consists of two columns, vertical columns, and joining at the top and the bottom. And in the space in between, I built the laboratory. And I used, in order to replicate the formation of clouds, because obviously in the atmosphere what happens is the air rises, and because gravity is getting less and less, the air expands, so it chills, because in order to expand it has to gain energy, and it causes the temperature to go down. And when you go up a mountain, it gets colder as you go up. Well, I couldn't obviously do that in 5 meters, so I arranged, I don't know whether, well, you can see in the lower right-hand column, I've got condensation coils there, and with a compressor inside the laboratory, and I can chill the air, and I can switch it on and off, and switch it on and off. And my idea was to see whether I got airflow when the air was chilled. And everybody told me it wouldn't work, that I would see nothing. And my first was with blue paper dangled in strategic points, and to my amazement, with video cams, I could show this fantastic movement going on. So I got more sophisticated. There, in fact, is the structure. It's very simplistic, unbelievably simplistic. In the top there, that sort of simplistic. Well, anyway, you can see in the mauve is the condensation coils, and then up above there's a good anemometer, two-dimensional ultrasonic anemometer, which is, very good. And I have thermocouples and things for measuring humidity, relative humidity, and pressure, barometric pressure at various points. And now this is what I get with a number of experiments. And I've I've got a few experiments up there, but they're all the same. I mean, I've got more than 100 experiments done now. And you can see on the x-axis is the time in seconds, and the kind of fuzzy red is the airflow, and the black in that case is my measurements of the airflow that you would expect from the pressure change, converting that into watts, and then from watts you can go to velocity. And you can see there are incredible parallels, absolutely incredible parallels. And when I switch on, you get this airflow rapidly taking off, and then as the time goes on, there are changes in the amount of condensation which is taking place, and so you get a very good reflection. And here are some more, and at the bottom you can see the pressure change in of the partial pressure change in hectopascals versus the airflow, and you see there is a good straight line correspondence there. And here are some more recent experiments where I let the thermostat of the compressor switch the compressor on and off, and you can see a very good reflection in the top one there. And
so, Peter, can I just, because there's a lot of graphs here and data, just to get to the heart of what you're trying to say, is that when you cook, you can see that you're getting an airflow
absolutely
in the system, which people have not recognized before.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. It has not been recognized. And of course, people immediately said, but you're chilling the air, therefore it's becoming more dense and it's sinking, and that's causing the airflow. So I did the physics and measured it, and the air density change is between 3,000 and 8,000 times less strong than the implosion caused by the partial pressure change. In other words, by converting to ice, because it forms ice. And what is beautiful about the experiment is that when I switch off, it rains. I collect the rain and I measure how much there is, and I do the calculations of what rainfall I would expect, and they correspond within a few grams. It is quite remarkable.
So the conclusion is, I just want to get to the conclusion,
Yes.
time is short.
Yeah.
The conclusion is that these are called rainforests for a good reason. They create their own rain. That's what
Yes.
you're trying to say.
Yes,
Is that
absolutely.
right? And that this is something new that science hasn't recognized
Yes.
before, and therefore if we lose them, something that's much more powerful than we thought.
Yeah, I mean, these are all.
I don't think we can look at. We've got
No,
time
I just want to
look at
show
more
you
graphs.
this. I just want
We've got
this.
enough graphs.
This is very. This is
Yeah,
the
no
last
one's going to
graph.
understand that. Just make
Well,
the point.
The
Just try
point
to
about
make the
this.
point.
The point about this graph is that you see this rapidly declining line on the left. The Colombian Amazon is indicated right at the bottom there. That will be the rainfall if we lose the Amazon rainforests. If Brazil destroys its forests, that means Colombia will absolutely die. There's no question. The rainfall, according to the theory at Leticia, which is on the border between Peru and Brazil, will be down to the rainfall that you would expect in the Negev desert. And that, whereas the conventional models show a 50% decline in rainfall. In other words, the traditional models are underestimating the potential for the whole of South America, which is the wettest continent that we have, I mean wettest in terms of liquid water, actually becoming a desiccated landscape.
Well, that's really the point, and I think we need to move on, Peter, and thank you very much indeed. Please thank Peter for we are playing with big unknowns here, and I have just been down the Nile. You know, water, or the lack of it, in a desert landscape, and it's just the river that provides life. And there's a lot of evidence going way back that, and you can tell us a bit, perhaps, Freddie, of geological changes or long time changes when perhaps parts of our world were much wetter. I mean, there used to be hippos and so on all over the region. Now we just have that thin strip, and what we're talking about here is we're playing with fire, really. That's the worry. Have we got this wrong? We're underestimating the risks of either climate-induced, and we've got to understand the difference between climate, weather, and Freddie, you can tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so my perspective on this whole problem is very different. So I'm an atmospheric physicist working on climate modeling, and what we are doing is not just for Brazil, but for any extreme weather event, trying to understand what is the role that anthropogenic climate change played in that. And in this, for an anthropogenic climate change, in this case, in most of the studies that we are doing, means greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously, deforestation is anthropogenic, changes the climate massively, and in Brazil, at this point in time, much more than the global greenhouse gas emissions. But climate change, or people just say climate change, most people think of greenhouse gas emissions. And so the question we are trying to answer is, what is actually the role of greenhouse gas emissions? So does it change the frequency of occurrence, or the likelihood of different kinds of extreme weather events to occur? Because there are up till very recently, there was this notion that you cannot attribute individual extreme weather events to climate change. People were saying either, well, we can only look at the mean climate change, so an increase in mean precipitation or a decrease, and an increase in mean temperature or a decrease. But we can now answer the question whether or not an individual extreme weather event has been made more or less likely due to anthropogenic climate change. And to do that, we obviously need observations to understand, to see if our climate models actually work and if they have something to do with reality or not. But we cannot use observations to say this event that we have just observed has been impossible without anthropogenic climate change, because we don't know that. We don't have observations that go back long enough to actually determine whether the event we are observing is a 1 in 1,000-year event or it's a 1 in 100-year event, because for most places on the world, we only have observations that go back 50 years maybe, and for most places in the tropics, it's only with the satellite area that we have any data at all. So we can't make answer this kind of questions from observations alone. However, what we can do is basically roll the weather dice, and we can use climate models to model possible under a given external drivers. And don't worry, this is the only and what you see here is the red curve, and which is possible weather, so the distribution of possible weather under the given climate forcings. And the given climate forcings is the aerosols in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere as we observe them today, and in most approaches also the sea surface temperatures as we observe them today. And then we run a climate model over and over again to get the possible weather under these scenarios. And sometimes you get an extreme heat wave if you're looking at heat waves, and most of the times you just get some mean temperatures, and sometimes you get a cold wave, and then you just say, okay, I'm interested we observed a heat wave temperatures, I don't know, 40 degrees Celsius, which is really damaging for all sorts of things. So we just count in this ensemble of the world we observe, how often do we get this type of event? And then we do exactly the same experiment with a climate model where we remove the anthropogenic greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And again, run our climate model over and over again and just count how often do we get a different, the type of extreme weather event we are interested in. And then when you look at temperature, you might get curves that look a bit like this schematic here, where the green curve is the distribution of weather events in a counterfactual world, so in the world that might have been without greenhouse gas emissions. And the red one is the same, the distribution of possible weather in the world we observe. And then we just compare the two, and so we can say, due to anthropogenic climate change, this type of event has been made so and so many times more likely. And this kind of science is only possible relatively recently, because you need very large ensembles of climate models. So you need the capability, the supercomputing power to run your climate models again and again. And you need to have relatively good climate models, because you need to simulate the weather and not just the mean climate and the mean development of the circulation. You can obviously not just look at climate models, because all climate models are wrong, but some of them are really useful. So you need to have observations to validate your climate models. And you can of course do something relatively similar with observations in places where you have long records of observations. So you can just look at observations of the last 10 years and then compare how often you get a certain type of event with observations of the 1900s. If you do this kind of study in a place where you have these long observations. Where you don't have these long records of observations, you can't really use the observations to validate your climate models. And ideally, you don't use just one type of climate model, but you use different types, so to get the uncertainty in your answer. And so this this is the possibility of doing this was one of the main things that were actually new in the latest IPCC report, and the 5th IPCC report that was released for the physical science basis in 2013. So that had a chapter on extreme event attribution, which was one of the very few really new things we learned about climate change in very recent years. And these are studies that have been, not all studied, but almost all studies that have been done on extreme weather events, because it's an emerging science and only very few scientists in the world are currently looking at this. And the solid circles are the ones where climate change changed the probability of the event, and the circles that have holes is where climate change did not play a role. And you see a very obvious gap on South America on this map. And this is from last year, so the Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, they have started 3 years ago to give a special issue on attribution of the extreme weather events of the previous year, and give an estimate of what was actually the role of anthropogenic climate change throughout the greenhouse gas emissions. And more scientists all over the world started working on this. And for this year's issue, which will appear in September, I have been leading a study on the drought in Brazil, together with people working at Sao Paulo Institute of Meteorology, and we were looking at what was actually the role that climate change played in this drought. And there are other groups of scientists all over the world working on heat wave in Argentina I was involved in, but there are more and more people all over the world, scientists starting
so
working
Freddie,
on
just because
this
of time,
issue.
can you try and summarize what you think, whether climate change is or is not having an impact on the Latin American situation?
I can't, because the result is embargoed till September. However, I can say what we do. So we looked at the precipitation and whether or not
we've got to cut it down, because we've got to get on to the last bit, and time's pressing on. Sorry to press you.
We looked at the precipitation and the evaporation, and both are affected by anthropogenic climate change. And you can, so which brings me to my very last slide. It is obviously, what is an event? Totally non-trivial question. You can ask, just from the meteorological point of view, a specific state of atmospheric circulation could be a blocking system that leads to a heat wave, so you can look at the frequency of these kind of blockings to occur. You can look at temperatures, but then for most people, an event is not lack of precipitation. For most people, a drought is harvests that are not there, and so it does not stop with the meteorology. So the atmospheric dynamics is one aspect, but we need, and we are working with people who model the ecosystem response on lack of precipitation and find out what the role of this played with this. So it is an interconnected system, and it's not just the meteorology alone. And we need to work, and we are actually doing that, working with people who are actually interested in this kind of questions. What is the event that matters for them? So we call them stakeholders, but these are indigenous people, are stakeholders. At the same time, people living in Sao Paulo needing electricity, wanting to build hydropower dams are stakeholders. So we scientists can look from the atmospheric science point of view and find lots of very interesting things. But to make
Freddie,
that
we've got to
actually
wrap
useful,
it there. Freddie, we've got to wrap it there. We've got to move on, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, but
to make
we
that
can come back to
useful,
some more
we
questions.
need to work
But
with these
we're
people.
going to have to move on. I'm sorry, but time
That
is
was the last
pressing.
thing.
Thank you, Freddie, but we've got to move on. And so, Rogerio, would you? I'm sorry, we'll bring in some questions. If you could give some. Thank you very much. The science is complicated on this, and trying to unpick these three things: climate change, weather events, El Nino events, the impact of deforestation on this water crisis is really complicated. And that's why it makes it difficult to get down to what's the cause. And so let's hear a bit, Rogerio, from your perspective. You're a journalist. You know, we're here about getting these issues over to ordinary people, to politicians. And what's the atmosphere in Brazil that you see?
Okay, well, I'm not a scientist, so no graphics like those ones. But I'll go back to basics, try to do it quickly. I think it's important to go back to basics to try to understand why things are the way they are, why the Amazon is being destroyed the way it is, or why we have the crisis that we have right now in Brazil. So basically, this is a bit about Brazil and the water. Okay, so 13% of all world's fresh water is in Brazil, like Andrew said, but 81% of it is in the Amazon region. Okay, and 5% only of the Brazilian population is in the Amazon region. In the southeast, it's 47% of the Brazilian population, and they're far away from most of the water. And so only 1.2% of the fresh water is where half of the Brazilian population is located. And water in Brazil is for people, but also energy, agriculture. 72% of the water is used in irrigation, and 80% of Brazil electricity comes from hydropower. So just to get a sense. And then talking about people and water, okay, so let's take the state of São Paulo, which is the most important state of Brazil economically, and where most of the people with the largest population. This is from 1970 to 2010, according to the Brazilian census. The population in the state of São Paulo went up from 18 million to 41 million. In the greater São Paulo, which is the area that is the city of São Paulo and all the cities around, from 8 million people to 20 million people, and this is all these 20 million people fighting for the same source of water. And then in the city of São Paulo, only 6 million people to 11.3 million people. So that's the situation that we have in a place like São Paulo, and there's just too many people and not enough water or not well produced and distributed. And just to get an idea of the sort of problem that we have, we are now going into the dry season in São Paulo, in the southeast. So that's why people are so worried. The reservoirs are still very low, and we're not going to have much rain from now until October, November. This is a good year, 2009. You see that we have the dry season, and it rained quite a lot. Those yellow dots there are the average. So we have a few months above average. But then we had like 2013 and 14. You can see that it's very, very low, and especially 2014 was really bad in the summer. And that is in the northeast as well. It's not only São Paulo. Like we had a very good year, for example, a normal year in Fortaleza, in Ceará, in the northeast of Brazil, and that was a very bad year. And what does that mean? Not only that we're going through a dry season now, but that is basically, those graphics are the graphics that the politicians, they like to look at. Basically, they hope for the best. They hope for rain to come. So there's not much of a long-term planning. It's all about short-term, and it's all about the idea that there's abundance in Brazil, that water is always going to be there. Quickly, situation in the reservoirs in Brazil, pretty low, but you see the Amazon rivers, 79%. That's why actually the government has been now building more and more dams in the Amazon rivers, because the water is there. So Brazil needs electricity. So now they have to go there and to get electricity, although many people say that Brazil should invest more in renewable energy, of course. And then São Paulo reservoirs, 8.2 or 20%, now including the dead volume, which is a water almost like underground. And 82% of Guarapiranga system, but the Guarapiranga system gets only like a small part in the south part of the city. The thing is, for example, there's a big reservoir in São Paulo called Billings, was built in the late 1920s. And this is the situation of Billings. Billings gets sewage from the river Pinheiros. Billings gets sewage so it's in such a state that the water can't be used. And that's the situation that we have. This is the Billings Reservoir as well. All these areas, by law, they were supposed to have been protected, but they have been invaded by people. They put their houses, they build communities. That's against the law, but Brazil just can't cope with the housing situation. Basically, according to the 2010 census, there are 11.6 million people in Brazil living in slums. They live without basic conditions. And these people, in many cases, in many situations, they go and just take the land. And the authorities, they can't cope with that. And the result for the environment is really bad, of course. So you get a situation when you have a big reservoir that can't be used because it's so polluted because of the people and the polluted waters come from another river. Just quickly here, water consumption in Brazil is still quite high, 159, but in Sao Paulo 190 liters per day, and the waste is 37%. It used to be 42% in 2004, but it's not actually improving that quickly. And this is just to have give an idea of how the politics actually played. The governor from California in January 2014 decided to reduce the consumption by 20% because the crisis in California. And then he said, I've declared this an emergency. I'm calling all Californians to conserve water in every way possible. And the main reservoir in California at that time was 36%, and the level was 36%. And then in September 2014, the governor of Sao Paulo, he was trying to be re-elected. There was a crisis already. People knew that there was a water shortage, but he came on television and said, there's no shortage of water in Sao Paulo. There will not be a shortage of water in Sao Paulo. He was re-elected, and then a few weeks later, then he started to try to reduce the consumption. And the main reservoir in Sao Paulo at that time was 7.2%. So that's how politics are normally played, very short terms, and the culture of abundance that just represents a huge problem to try to cope with all the issues that have been raised here.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, as you can see, there's quite a complicated series of issues interplaying here. We've heard about the indigenous communities themselves who are directly affected by this, the journey that Sue has made through the center of Brazil. We've heard about the science, and different opinions around the science, and then the impact of the politics. Now it's your turn, so let's just get some questions. I've got one in the front here, and then I'll come to you, and another one back there. So let's go with you.
Everybody in the room should be aware of what a huge political statement it is for Nixie Maka to be here. I've been with Survival since '69, and I and many others have complained we had no indigenous people working with us. And the reason for that was they were too angry. They were so furious they wouldn't work with us. So thank you for controlling your anger and being so eloquent and such a powerful presence here. But I wanted to ask a white man's question of a white lady there. I mean, meteorology is worldwide. I don't think we can just talk about Brazil. Can you give us some idea of how all the models are working? How are you all talking to each other? I mean, the Yangtze Gorges plays on, its meteorology plays on the Andean gorges and the dams there. Also, we don't have much data going back, but we can tell how many drivers there are. I mean, do you scientists actually, have you been able to catalog which of the drivers, human drivers and not, and how they all play on each other? How far along are we in that?
Well, we've made a lot of progress in recent years on that. I don't think we have cataloged all drivers, but with the ability to actually model counterfactual worlds, the world that would have been without greenhouse gas emissions, we can, in some cases, also, which I think is maybe even more important, to say, okay, you can't blame anthropogenic climate change in this case. The reasons are more local for this kind of crisis that you have there. And there is certainly a comprehensive catalog of drivers, but we make a lot of progress on that. And especially because there are meteorologists working on the meteorology, but because we have started to work much more interdisciplinary now, we have learned a lot more on how the different drivers work together and how they are interconnected.
There's a lady.
Hi. Thank you very much for all of your presentations. My name is Alicia. I run a small Brazilian arts organization. I have a very brief question for the audience, like, how many of you are Brazilian? How many of you are Brazilian? Okay, so I just would like to add a bit of the conversation. There is a great article about the indigenous situation that's been published last week. It's been the Indian Day in Brazil, the 19th of April. It's a day we had a huge mobilization going to Brasilia. It's been happening for over 10 years, about 10 years now. And please, if you are interested in it, just access the media. It's called Brazil Observer with S, Brazil Observer, and it's called A Simple Guide to Understand Brazilian Issues. There's not only the Pact 215, there are other 6 amendments that's been, the Pact 215 has been archived temporarily so far because some people are still going to try to fight in. But there are other amendments and we can all make a difference, so please liaise to survival and please liaise to the work that she's been doing because that's fundamental to help. And to come and talk to me afterwards as well, I'll be pleased to talk to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a gentleman at the back there, one here, and someone else at the back there, gentleman there, and then you, sir.
Good evening. Is there a danger that what to me as a complete layman in this area thinks is possibly a simple position, a simple scientific position, is being obscured by the incredibly complex global meteorological arguments? Now, we've seen the whole global warming argument sort of get kicked into the long grass and be used by politicians as an excuse for doing nothing. In Brazil, as I understand it from tonight's lectures, the situation is completely different. Here, you have the producer of the humidity, the producer of the rain, being destroyed. Now that's unique as I understand it. All the other problems with water is because rivers have been diverted or squandered. But the actual source of the rain, the source of the water, has not hitherto, as I understand it, been completely attacked and obliterated in the way here. Now it seems to me there is a very simple argument or a simple proposition which ought to have the publicity in order to gain leverage to stop the corruption of clearly various officials and government bodies around the world, but in Brazil in particular. Now, is there not a danger that what is actually, to my mind, as a layperson, and I do stress that, a quite simple proposition being obscured by over-complex scientific arguments regarding global warming, etc.? Shouldn't we be far more parochial?
We've got the point. Let's Rogério, do you want to just respond to that from your experience in Brazil?
Well, regarding the current drought, my understanding is that there's no proof that actually the deforestation in the Amazon is causing the drought. Actually, the drought is being caused by it was like an encounter of 2 masses of air that was just like one of those bizarre events that doesn't have, at least it's not proved that it has any connection with what's happening in the Amazon. But of course, deforestation in the Amazon is a problem. In Brazil, it's growing. Last year, the latest figures is actually that it's growing dramatically. Actually, it's quite scary. And it's about political pressure. The problem in Brazil is that the forces of those in the agricultural business is massive. The political force is really the Minister of Agriculture in Brazil is a strong representative of that sector, and there's a huge demand economically. Brazil is now in a recession. Brazil's economy is doing bad. It needs to export food. Brazil needs to feed its people, so there's a huge pressure to get the forest out of the way. So it's a political debate. It has to put a lot of pressure on the government with good arguments, and the science is always a good argument.
Peter, you have a quick comment. Is the science being lost here?
Yes, I mean, you say that the drought is not necessarily connected to anything that's going on in the Amazon. Well, the point is this. I mean, there's a wonderful example of the way a rainforest, the wettest rainforest in the world on the west coast of Colombia, actually sucks in the winds, because you have the trade winds going across the Pacific Ocean from Central and South America towards Indonesia, And if you look at satellite imagery of the winds flowing, the trade winds, you suddenly see that a portion of them is sucked back, and it makes this rainforest get some 12.5 meters of rain a year. It's unprecedented. And I would suggest that with the Amazon, that with the devastation that's already taken place, particularly in the from and a fringe all the way through to Bolivia and Peru, that you've got a dramatic change then. And if it is true that the biotic pump principle functions, the fact you've lost that forest means you're no longer getting that sucking that I've described. And this will change whatever happens over the Atlantic Ocean. It's very complex, but you put a spanner in the works essentially, and I think that Brazil and South America is beginning to reap the consequences.
Thank you, Peter. We are putting a spanner in. What's your question, sir?
Two things, if I may. One is that on the 17th of June, the Climate Coalition, I think it's called, is organising a huge meeting with politicians, etc., about the issue of climate change. And I'm sure you can find out about this by Googling 17th of June climate change.
Do you have a question?
Yes. I work with Father Leo, who is a Roman Catholic priest based in Sao Paulo, and he was working with Dino Ramos. I don't know whether that name means anything.
Do you have
he
a
was
question?
The survivor of the Coriambria massacre in Rondonia. I would be very happy to talk to any of you about this afterwards, and you may be able to help me.
Okay.
I might be able to help
you. Don't have a question. Can we go on to someone at the back here, please? Yeah. All good. Yeah, but we're trying to get some questions. Time is short. And the gentleman here.
Okay, brief question. Someone briefly mentioned corruption before, but it hasn't really been mentioned by the panelists. How big a problem is political corruption? Because if it's really big, until that's tackled, all your wonderful efforts here are not going to go anywhere.
Okay, let's
question, by the way.
Shout loudly just to speed up. Let's get a couple of other questions. Yours, sir, there was a question there. Forget the microphone. Just speak loudly, or if you can get it there quickly.
Can I ask? To what extent do we know who the beneficial owners of the logging companies are, both the illegal and the legal? And a pragmatic question, I think, are they companies, are they pension funds, are they countries, and what is the best way to address these issues? Chairman, you mentioned, for example, our diet early on. So should we be changing our behaviours? Should we be persuading our pension funds to disinvest in appropriate companies? Or do we have to look for huge changes in the global finance system and look at maybe down the road at the City of London? I just wonder, concrete suggestions. It's been a very moving set of presentations, but how do we move on?
Well, let's deal with the corruption issue. Anyone wants to comment on the corruption? Patrick, do you want to say something about that? Is there evidence of it?
Yeah, on the timber, the logging companies, most of the logging is done by small Brazilian companies, but there is a huge, I can't remember the name of it, huge Indonesian company, logging company that has major interest there. On the corruption, it is directly related to the climate thing, but on Belo Monte, the dam, the latest news from Brazil is that the corruption from Petrobras is similarly reflected in the construction projects in Belo Monte. So there's an awful lot of money has been going into the wrong hands on the back of granting those construction contracts. It hasn't been proved yet, but the head of Camargo Correa, who has turned what we would call Queen's evidence, has pointed the finger at that. That answers a question for me, because I've asked this question for 10 years now. Why is the Brazilian government so intent on building this dam? Lots of studies have shown it's socially, environmentally, and economically unviable. Now I think we know why.
Could we just ask Nishiwaka to say, do you want to say, make a comment?
No, he actually answered the question about the corruption.
Microphone. Oh, you got
the
one.
big problem with the Petrobras companies. But I think, in my opinion, there is no. It's obvious for us, indigenous people, or that the corruption in Brazil is very strong, and it affects our life straight away. In illegal loggings, private companies, or sometimes even group of people, normal people, willing to live, but they can't have access to the government support. So they try to make their own business on illegal cutting down trees, or also working for mining companies. So for us, it's obvious that the corruption is a big problem, but it's everywhere. But in this case, in Brazil, it's it's too much. But yeah, okay.
Look, thank you. I think just to answer your question from my perspective, I have a sort of feeling that unless we turn off the money supply, which is driving this, we ain't going to win this battle. And that is the ultimate driver of deforestation, is the money supply. Who are financing these dams, who are financing the cattle industry, soy industry, and so on. And I work a lot with investors on this, and if you are interested, you should look at a website which was launched in February this year, called Forest 500, forest500.org. This is like the Fortune 500 for forests, and it was launched by my organization, the Global Canopy Programme, and it tracks the 500 power brokers of the deforestation economy worldwide. That includes 150 investors and 250 companies and 50 governments and 50 others. And we rank them for their performance on deforestation. So we have identified the 150 investors that are most involved and linked to deforestation. You can find them on the website. And the 250 big companies that are involved worldwide in this issue. Unless we deal with those companies, it's like a tsunami of money that is flowing and tearing down forests. And so really, I think, yes, we do have to engage with the investors here. And yes, a lot of them are just right here in London. And yes, we should disinvest from deforestation. And we are seeing this building as an idea within the fossil fuel industry to get people out, starving industry of money. That's one way that we can change things quickly. We can do the same thing with deforestation, and both of them have a huge benefit for climate change by getting the emissions out of the sky. Thank you very much. Let's have another question. Any more here? There are a lot of hands. Let's have you, sir, and you. We're a bit gender imbalanced. We've had one from you. Let's have a few other ladies here who might want. She's already talked. I want to get some other. We're a bit gender imbalanced here. So let's have you and you. Microphone, is it with you? Who's got it? You've got it. Go ahead. Let's have 3 quick-fire questions right along that line.
My name is
better
Thomas.
Wrap up.
I'm also a climatologist, and I specialize in food policy. And in conjunction with your approach, is that taxing the consumer at the point of sale for the most climate-intensive foods and activities is also a very, very important step. For example, meat, which is my specialty, that if the price of meat were to reflect the externality that it costs, like doubling or even tripling the price, that could...
It's a very interesting question, that, but who wants to put the price of petrol up with carbon taxes? Anybody voting for that? What did our government, the current government, say they were going to be the greenest government in the world? What do they cut first? Get rid of the carbon taxes. Nobody wants to pay them. That's our problem.
Nobody confronted them on that during this election.
You got an election. You've got an election coming up any minute, so it's your choice. Let's have have you got a question or just pass it on? Good comment, but next one.
I just wanted to ask, so presumably you mentioned 1 billion Chinese people, and the fact that perhaps the reason that so much soy is being grown and exported there is because they want to feed their chickens and they've got a lot of people to feed. Presumably this sort of capitalist position would, we've got 1 billion people to feed, which is, in our view, more important than saving the indigenous peoples, who are far fewer in number. Is the argument that that is being made tonight that we must stop this, otherwise the indigenous peoples will be wiped out and have their way of life destroyed? Or is the argument that there'll be a global impact and sort of a disaster throughout the world? Or is the argument both those? We need to stop?
Okay, good question. Put it on to this guy here. Let's get another one, then we can have a quick reaction from the panel.
I'm just going to question the base of the changes in the climate change. I mean, there are global switches in riverbeds, they're transient, there's global changes in weather patterns that happen on the scale of thousands of years beyond the human lifespan, even as a species. So to what extent do you think this change in water and this change in climate is related to those kind of overall planetary changes beyond the anthropogenic changes that are happening?
Okay, there are two sort of different areas to talk about here. Let's just deal with the economic one. Is this all about just 750,000 indigenous people, or is this something that the whole world needs to?
Up the forest.
Yeah, but is that affecting, what are we doing this for? Are we trying to save the forest just for 750,000 indigenous people?
No, for all of us.
Well, explain.
I thought I had at
You
the
had?
beginning.
I mean, I'm with you. I'm just trying to frame the question.
Yeah, I just think that indigenous peoples are holding up the forest for us, because the minute they go, it'll be a lot easier for people to go in with chainsaws and destroy the forest, and then we're going to suffer too. And one of the practical things you can do, questions: if you're buying wood, where does it come from? Is it FSC? Find out. If the guy doesn't know in the shop, say, I want to speak to your boss. Where does this loose seat of mahogany come from? Ask questions. You've all got so much information. Use it to make this place better.
Sorry.
You should walk out. Just quick comment on that.
Yes. I think we indigenous people have a vital role to look after of this planet, because you, you are not. You're just destroying.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
If we all died, you will die.
Exactly.
And people sometimes they don't think in the future of their children. We see this future, and it's a question of understanding, because we see what's going on since many years ago in this world. War, people kill each other to take over the land, anything. Disease that didn't exist in the past, it's all created by man. We can't see a future for if this continue happening. And we know our way of life, sustainable, it's very sustainable and natural. Who would not like to live in a sustainable way of life to die of something? Well, this is quite tricky, but I think we have a very important role on this planet to look after the lands, because this is not us. We are just the guardians. It belongs to everyone, and that should be your concern as well, to protect. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's just have a quick comment on. Thank you very much. Heartfelt, great. A quick comment on the question to do with the science. Yeah. Is this to do with long-term climate change on a much bigger scale, or natural cycles, or is this something else that's going on? Any? You wanted to answer
I think
that?
we shouldn't confuse two different scales here. So with this drought that we are observing now has not been caused by long-term climate change. If we see a change in the precipitation or evaporation, it is something like, okay, it has been made from a 1 in a 100-year event to a 1 in a 70-year event, or it has been a 1 in a 70-year event, or it is a 1 in a 100-year event now, or it has not changed at all. But the problems are caused by some, but there is obviously a very large role of natural variability in the causes of extreme weather events. And the problems caused by the events are due to water usage and these kind of things. And there is no doubt that for the long-term climate change, if you deforest the Amazon, then that will affect the global circulation. Whether it's the effect you are so fond of or whether the effect is slightly different is not so important. But of course, the vegetation has a huge influence on the feedback between the atmosphere and the vegetation and the soil, and influences the larger population. But this is a long-term change. It does not cause the exact now, but all of this plays together.
Thank you very much. And Peter, just a quick last comment from you and one more from Rogerio, and I think we better wrap up at the end, because I think everybody needs to go.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, just to say, coming back to this notion of, why the indigenous people versus the billion in China, actually, the Amazon basin is incredibly important in sending a stream of water vapor straight to the Midwest. It arrives in the Midwest in May, and of course the Midwest was the granary, the granary of the world. And so, in fact, the intact forest really is sustaining agriculture far, and obviously it's sustaining it in Argentina and so on. So in other words, the fact that the indigenous people are part of that protection, and the only protection we really have, means that they are critical to all our survival.
Thank you, Peter. And a few final comments from you, Rogerio.
Yeah, just quickly. I think that when it comes to Brazil, I think nothing will change unless the country embraces a different economic model. Brazil in the last 15 years has managed to take 20 million people, or even more, 30 million people, out of their extreme poverty level, which was hugely important. But it did that exporting soya, exporting ore, exporting meat. So Brazil is an exporter of commodities. Brazil is an exporter of minerals. So unless Brazil embraces a different economic model and tries to develop and grow, protecting more its nature, and try to embrace other sectors, nothing will change. In the past 10 or 15 years, the argument was that, well, we need to carry on growing, it's working, and so we can't stop that, or many people were saying that, and as I was saying, some sectors are very powerful and they have a lot of political influence. And now that the country is not doing well, the country is in a recession, it's difficult, because if people raise their hands and say, well, we need to protect, and they say, well, what if we're environment? We need to export, we need to make the economy grow, so that argument is even weaker now. Nothing will change unless this economic model, this thinking, the way the country operates economically changes. And if it doesn't change, individual actions here in Europe or in the richer world are important, but actually they will not have that impact, because the situation will be the same in Brazil.
So the only little thing that we can do is working with people like Survival, or our organisation, which is Tribes Alive, to help Indigenous peoples to stay in the forest and try to save it from the inside without the corruption from the outside. Thank you.